All right. So welcome everybody. Our Torah reading for this Shabbat is, in terms of the parsha, a double parsha. It's Mattot and Masei, the last two Torah portions in the book of Numbers. So in the Eitz Chaim, it begins on 9:41. And this is Numbers chapter 30, starting from verse 2. And that's Mattot. And in some years, Mattot stands alone, and then Masei is the last Torah portion. But this year, it's Mattot and Masei combined together. Just a side kind of fact, this, and there are many factors that get into the calculation of the calendar and how the Jewish year works each year. But the point is that our Torah portions are adjusted according to certain factors. And one of them is that Devarim, the beginning of the book of Deuteronomy, is always to be read on the Shabbat before Tisha B'Av. So therefore, when you need to get an extra week before reading Devarim, so you split Mattot and Masei. When Tisha B'Av is coming up really soon, then you got to combine them so that Devarim can be read ahead of time. So that's what's happening this year. Next Shabbat, we'll read Parshat Devarim. That very night, Motzei Shabbat, will be Tisha B'Av. And so therefore, this year, Mattot and Masei are combined together. And this sometimes is the way it is in, mostly sometimes in Israel, they can be combined or not combined. And in outside of Israel, they might be combined and not combined, not the same as Israel. So those things, because Israel's Yontif calendar is different than ours. Anyway, that's just a side point. That
my book doesn't have the second portion.
Sure it does.
Mine just says Mattot.
So after you do Mattot, what book do you have?
I have the Jewish Study Bible.
So the Jewish Study Bible. So look then at chapter 33.
Oh, I see it.
Chapter 33.
After 30, yeah, it starts at 33. I think that page stuck together, so I didn't see it.
That's
Sorry.
Right. So they try to stick together these two Torah portions.
Mm-hmm.
So that's they like to be together. This Shabbat will also be Rosh Chodesh, so we'll have a second Torah reading as well, a little maftir reading about the sacrifices that are offered on Shabbat and Rosh Chodesh, but that's not really part of the regular cycle. But Mattot and Masei, when they are combined, they are, I think, not sure. This is Andy's bailiwick, but it certainly feels like one of the longest Torah readings that there is. It's a very long Torah reading when they get combined. So anyway, what's in this combined Torah reading? So Mattot means, literally the word mateh is a staff, and the word staff is used as a, I guess I always mix up the two. There's a metonymy and a synecdoche. And I don't remember which one is which. But for instance, when you say the crown, and what you mean is the royal house or the monarchy, let's say in England, or you say the White House, and you really mean the presidential administration and so on. So here the mateh, the staff, means the head of a tribe, and therefore Mattot are the tribes, right? So
I think that's synecdoche.
Okay, thank you. And metonymy, so forget it, exactly, right. So anyway, so this is the beginning of communicating to all of the leaders of the tribes of Israel. The beginning of the Torah reading has to do with the rules that of nidarim, like nidre. We say kol nidre, all our oaths. It's about keeping your word. And the Torah says everything that comes out of your mouth, you need to stand by. You need to keep your word. And then there are the loopholes. So that's the rest of chapter 30. Then starting with chapter 31, we have a grim episode where the Israelites go to battle against Midian. Midian is blamed for the terrible catastrophe of worshiping Baal Peor. The daughters of Midian went out and they seduced the Israelite men, and we had a whole plague back then, and Pinchas came and he stopped it by murdering the ringleader or the public figure that represented that and his consort. So that happened, a couple of weeks ago, last week and the week before. So now this is a military revenge campaign, and it has all kinds of gruesome and morally troubling aspects that attend any war. Who should you attack? What about innocent bystanders? How do you, make sure that you're going to achieve victory? It's not a pretty picture, and there are also. It seems that the Israelites actually don't follow Moses' instructions, and they don't do everything that he wanted them to do. So he gets angry at them for that. And then there's a whole section on dividing up the spoils. So there's quite a discussion that has to do with that particular military campaign. So that goes all the way through chapter 31. Chapter 32 brings us to the very intriguing story of the challenge by Reuven and Gad, two tribes from the 12 tribes, and then half of Manasseh joins along a little bit later, and they don't want to go into the land. And Moses freaks out, and Moses goes, "This is deja vu all over again. We just spent 40 years wandering the desert. Don't we learn anything? What are you doing? You're going to completely destroy our chances of going into the land." And they strike a compromise. The reason that they want to stay outside of the land is because they like the grazing. They have cattle, and they want to graze their cattle in the big, prairie land of Gilead. I talked about that in this week's Torah Sparks. I've talked about it before. So that's this very provocative story where just when the promised land is in sight and the promise is just waiting to be fulfilled, and again, you've got Israelites who say, "You know what? I'm not that into it. I've got some other things that are more important to me," and they are accommodated. They are accommodated. So that's the end of Mattot. Then we have Masei. Masei means the journeyings of. These are the journeyings of the children of Israel. We have a little review of the fact that the Israelites had journeyed for these 40 years from here to there, from there to there, from here to there, from there to there. We have all these names of all these different places, most of which I think we actually don't know what they are. And there's no other report in the Torah that anything significant happened anywhere there in those places. Nevertheless, they're listed. We sing the Torah reading. We have a chant for those. So it's this kind of sing-song chant where we sing all of the different stations of the journeys. There are 42 stations altogether in these listings, and the idea, what the idea is, people discuss, but the point is we are now literally at the threshold of the land of Israel, and then we get the preparation for entering into the land. Israel is warned that they can't be soft-hearted about this. They have to fight very brutally in order to make sure that they don't let the the indigenous culture influenced them. And then chapter 34, we have the delineation of the borders of the land of Israel. And it goes through north, south, east, and west. These are the lines that delineate the promised land. This is not the only place where we have borders delineated. Each time they're different. And at no time have any of these borders actually been the true reflection of what the land of Israel, in terms of Jewish settlement, has been. We have the idea then again of the official lottery to give out all of the tribal portions. This is supervised by the national leadership. This is God's, giving out by lottery and yet with divine providence to make sure everybody gets exactly what they're supposed to get. I mentioned in passing in my Torah Sparks that this is in stark contrast to what happens with Reuven, Gad, and half of Manasseh. There is no divine participation. No, God doesn't give out, here, Reuven, you get this part. God, you get this part. They take it. They take it for themselves. They decide what's good for them. On the other side of the Jordan, God, through this system and supervised by God's representatives, God decides where each tribe should sit. It's much more of a an official and divine process. So and then we have another detail. So I told you this is a long Torah reading. Then we have another detail, and that is, since the Levites don't have a portion in the land, so where are they supposed to live? Now, one solution is everybody's got to give one bedroom in their house to a Levite. Right? That would be, the grandma apartment. Make a Levite your neighbor. But that's not exactly what happens. Not at all.
British tried that. It didn't work.
What?
The British tried that. It didn't work.
Yeah. So the Levites become, they are apportioned cities. So we have, again, it's interesting differentiation. Mostly at this point in biblical times, the people of Israel are pictured as being an agrarian society. They have their pastures, they have their farmlands, they have their vineyards, they have their, grazing for their sheep. But the Levites live in towns or cities. If you want to get fancy, how big they were is not clear. And they are also charged with running the cities of refuge. The cities where if somebody kills somebody, they run to that city of refuge so that they shouldn't be victims of a revenge killing by the family of the person that was killed. And then we have to decide, was this accidental? Was it on purpose? Does the person go to trial? Does the person, have to pay with their life if there was the proper rules were followed, circumstances. But the Levites are the custodians of all of these cities. So they become city folk. So the Levites are distinguished from the children of Israel in a kind of a very, fundamental civilizational way, cultural way. Okay. And then you have now we're up to chapter 36. Chapter 36, we have as an epilogue of the famous story that we had last week of the daughters of Tzlofchad. Daughters of Tzlofchad, created this feminist revolution where they said, hey, what's going on with us? Just because our father didn't have any sons, so he's not going to have a portion in the land. So for them, it was really, really important to be included in the allotment of the land. They wanted their piece of the land for in the name of their father's estate. So then now what we have is we have the tribal leaders. They come from Menashe. Menashe is this interesting tribe because half of Menashe doesn't care about living in the land of Israel. They decide to live on the other side. But these Menashe'ites, the daughters of Tzlofchad and the other half of the tribe, they have a place allotted to them in the land of Israel proper. And now the leaders of that half of the tribe come to Moses and they say, you know what? You wanted to be so nice to the daughters of Tzlofchad and to Tzlofchad of blessed memory, and you want to make sure that he has a portion in the land. But guess what? It's not necessarily going to work out that way according to the rules of the Torah. Because if they get married to people from another tribe, the husbands will take possession of the land and we will lose Menashe lands to whoever the tribes are that the husbands belong to. So they say that's not fair. The whole point you're trying to do is to give these people, a portion in the land of that belongs to Menashe, and this actually ends up being self-defeating. So the answer is that the daughters of Tzlofchad agree to marry within their tribe. They agree that they can marry the Torah says, marry anybody you want as long as they're from Menashe. It's like the old, you can buy any color Model T you want as long as it's black, right? So that's what they agree to. And as a result, their husbands still belong to the same tribe. So even though they don't belong to the same family, the land stays in the allotted portion of Menashe. And that's the happy resolution, the compromise that's reached. And then finally, the last verse of the book of Numbers, Eila mitzvot mishpatim asher tziva Hashem biyad Moshe el bnei Yisrael be'avot Moav al Yarden Yerecho. Right? These are the commandments and regulations that the Eternal enjoined upon the Israelites at the hand of Moses on the steppes of Moab at the Jordan near Jericho. Right there, right opposite on the other side of the Jordan is the city of Jericho, which of course is famous, when Joshua, leads them across. So that's a long summary. It took me quite a bit of time, but also the schmoozing was also took time. So it's not my fault. Anyway, a lot to consider. Does anybody want to look at the long list of our travels? How's that? No, Sarita's going, no way. That was just a joke. Okay, so what are we going to look at? This is a very quiet group here. Unmute yourselves, say something. No, nobody has a particular preference of what to look at?
I was just going to make a comment that it's interesting that they ends with the rights of the women from Tzlofchad, but it starts with the women don't exactly have rights when it comes to taking vows.
Okay, yeah, a good point. In the end, it actually, what you said, it ends with the rights of Tzlofchad, it actually ends with mitigating or lessening the rights of the daughters of Tzlofchad. So the beginning of the Torah reading has the women being portrayed as under the thumb of their father and their husband
until they're widowed, until they're divorced or widowed. Which
is only implied. It's not really described fully what happens if there's a widow and nobody's around to
remarry.
I don't think it says that, but maybe I'm wrong.
No.
So, but
yes, in the 10th verse, I think it does say it. But anyways,
right. But in general, the women are assumed to be under the control of some male authority figure, either their father or their husband. And then at the end, that's exactly, again, it's assumed the daughters of Tzlofchad will get married, and then it's understood the men will have the property. The men will take over the property.
Right.
So let's keep it in the tribe. And that's what happens. So yes, the women are definitely, after we had that breakthrough last week of the women being recognized as rightful heirs. And of course, even that breakthrough was only a half a breakthrough. because the women are not given inheritance rights alongside the brothers. The sisters and brothers do not equally inherit their parents. The sisters of the daughters of Tzlofchad, the 5 sisters, only inherit because there are no sons.
Right.
If there had been sons, they wouldn't inherit. So it's still not, it's a breakthrough, but only if there's no competition, right? Once the male is in the game, the male is deferred to, right? That's what happens here again and again and again in various ways. There is another kind of recurrent motif here, or a doubling, and that is the idea of the vows themselves. The beginning of our Torah portion, Mattot, talks about the binding nature of an oath, and then with some ways, some exceptions of how to get out of it, but in general, an oath is a binding thing. And then that's exactly the mechanism that is employed to make a compromise with Reuven and Gad, with the tribes Reuven and Gad. They are forced to take an oath, which they will have to abide by. And that oath is that they will fight along, as the avant-garde, as the shock troops, on behalf of their fellow tribes in the land of Israel on the western side, the western bank of the Jordan. And then only when the battles are completely finished, then they'll go back to the eastern side of the Jordan and rejoin their families. So they take an oath, a solemn oath, that this is what's going to happen. In rabbinic law, these sections are actually combed through to get details about how to administer oaths and what makes a binding oath and so on. So, but the idea of taking an oath is crucial in both of those episodes. How about, should we do the oaths then? Let's start with 941. Let's start with Mattot at the beginning. Oh, and that's another thing. I forgot I have to end early because I have to get over to the Shiva at Anne Lapel's home. So we're going to finish in 9 minutes. So at 7:15. I'm sorry. Good. All right.
Will you be back for Zohar?
Zohar is starting later. I sent a note out. Maybe you
Okay.
didn't get it. Maybe I neglected to put you on the note.
Okay, I'll check.
It's starting at 8:30.
Okay,
So that'll give me time to get back.
thank you.
Okay. So who's going to read for us? Starting with verse 2, chapter 30, Numbers. Somebody, quick. Alan, thank you.
Moses spoke to the heads of the Israelite tribes, saying, "This is what the Lord has commanded. If a man takes a vow to the Lord or takes an oath imposing an obligation on himself, he shall not break his pledge. He must carry out all that has crossed his lips."
Okay, so this is the beginning of that communication. Just take a look. You have the Etz Chaim, yes?
Yeah.
All right, so take a look at the note number for verse number 2, heads of the Israelite tribes.
Heads of the Israelite tribes, it is rare to find the law addressed to Israel's leaders rather than to the people as a whole.
Right, so it says here that Moses spoke to the Rashei Hamatot, the heads of the tribes. And the note is pointing out, hey, we should raise an eyebrow here. This is very unusual. Usually it says, Vaydaber Moshe el b'nei Yisrael, or God says to Moses, Daber el b'nei Yisrael, speak to the children of Israel. Sometimes it says, Vaydaber Moshe el kol adat Yisrael, right, to the entire congregation of Israel. Obviously, when there are some specialized rules for the priests, so then Moses speaks only to the priests because it's only for them. But this is a law that you would think applies to everyone. And yet it's being delivered in this kind of step-by-step hierarchical, process of Moses to the heads of the people, and then they are supposed to then follow up and communicate it to everybody else. Right? So what do we make of that? Anybody have any ideas?
Where does it say that they're supposed to communicate to anybody else?
Well, so that would be, that's, does it say that explicitly? I'll say in a second why I think it does say it explicitly, but if it's only communicated to them and it's secret, how is anybody supposed to know what the rules are about their oaths? If it's a sin to break your oath and nobody gets told about whether they, what the rules are for keeping your oaths, then how is that going to work for the community?
Are these?
The leaders will tell.
So the answer is they have to tell everybody.
Yeah.
But it's given to them. That's what in my reading, and it's not, I didn't make this up. It's lost in the translation. The translation in the first verse of our portion, verse 2, right, says, Moses spoke to the heads of the Israelite tribes saying. The word saying is the translation of Lamor. Right? Vaydaber Moshe el Rashi Hamatot Livnei Israel Lamor. So Lamor is most of the time translated as saying or as quote. Right? Because you don't really need saying. Moses spoke to the children of Israel, to the children of Israel or to the heads of the tribes. Right? You could say and said, or in the following words, something like that. But so that's the standard way to read it. But lamor means to speak.
To say, yeah.
To say. So many commentators understand lamor meaning I'm communicating this to you so that you shall now then communicate it. Lamor, to say it to others. Right? So that's where I would say it is explicit that this has to be communicated. But because, and I said otherwise, the next verse, any person, right? Ish, if a man makes a vow, well, how's that person supposed to know what entailed with making a vow and what the rules are unless they get told? So these have to be communicated with everybody, to everybody. Okay, so lo yachel varo, right? He shall not break his pledge. Another word of a way of reading that the Hebrew, right? If a person makes any kind of obligation upon themselves, the Hebrew is lo yachel varo. That could be he shall not profane his words. Yachel like chilul Shabbat, desecration of the Shabbat, right? Another way to read it is he shall not hollow out his words. He shall not make his words hollow, meaningless, from the word halal. One is chol, which means profane, mundane, and the other is halal, which means emptiness, right? Don't make your words empty. Right? You have to call ayotse kechol ayotse mipiv yaseh. Just as anything that comes out of his mouth, he has to follow up and perform it, fulfill it. Okay, so that's the baseline. Okay, 4.
So why did he say it to the heads and not to the people?
So right now we don't have an answer. Let's go.
If a woman makes a vow to the Lord or assumes an obligation while still in her father's household by reason of her youth, and her father learns of her vow or her self-imposed obligation and offers no objection, all her vows shall stand and every self-imposed obligation shall stand. But if her father restrains her on the day he finds out, none of her vows or self-imposed obligations shall stand, and the Lord will forgive her since her father restrained her.
Okay, so now we go. Look at this transition from verse 3 to verse 4. Verse 3 is a general rule. Ish, any person who makes a vow, they have to keep their vow and they should not break their vow, defile their vow, etc. Right? The very next verse, ve'isha, right? As opposed to ish, ve'isha. Now we have feminine. A woman who makes a vow, then she has a context. She lives within her father's house. Her father can get her off of the vow. Her father can cancel her vow. So in the 2 minutes that we have left, I want to go back to that question that we just had. And now I would, if we continue with the rest of this section through the end of the chapter, the whole section talks about different circumstances having to do with the woman. Is she married? Is she not married? So it begs a question. What about a man? According to the simple reading of our text, women have a way of their vows being canceled, but the beginning verse of our legal text, verse 3, seems to be categorical. If a man makes a vow, there's no way out of it. Right? Women's vows are contingent. And if anybody, if anybody in authority, the father, or then later on the husband, decides that, no, this is not good, I don't like it, or she doesn't, it's not good for her, et cetera, they can cancel it. So back to Kol Nidre, right? We stand up there on Erev Yom Kippur and we go, look, all of the vows that we did, they should be canceled, they should be nullified, etc. Shouldn't count. Now that's a very ceremonial, symbolic act, but actually there is such a thing as Hatarat Nedarim, but it's not in scripture. The question that jumps out of this text before, after you look at the details that are in it is, what about a man? Could a man ever get out of their vow? And again, looking at Reuven and Gad, the story later, Moses is satisfied that Reuven and Gad will have to follow up with what they promise because there's no way out. Can you imagine if Reuven and Gad, the first Yom Kippur, they get up, Kol Nidre, and they say, okay, we didn't really mean it, we're not going to go fight, etc. So what good is it? Then the vow is completely worthless. So there's an assumption here that vows are totally binding. But we're all human, and we all can conceive of circumstances where a man would need to get their vow canceled. How could they do it? There is no mechanism in the Torah that authorizes the cancellation of a vow. Unless, and now I really have to finish up, unless we say that's why the heads of the tribes are being instructed. The heads of the tribes are in loco parentis. The heads of the tribes are the fathers of everybody else in the tribe. So vis-a-vis the heads of the tribe, every man is under the thumb, under the control of the head of the tribe. They can go to the head of the tribe, or the head of the tribe can intervene and cancel their vow. This is the basis for what the rabbis decided, was that a court can cancel a vow, or one sage can cancel a vow if you go to them and you put out the argument why you regret saying what you said, and so on and so forth. Otherwise, there is no basis in the Torah for that very, very necessary safety valve. But perhaps that's why it's given to the leaders of the community as the start-off point. That's what I would suggest here. I got to run. Zeigezint. Do you guys want us to continue talking to each other, or should I end the meeting?
End the meeting.
I'm going to end the meeting. Wait, I got to do this other thing first. First, I have to stop the recording.